So guess what, folks? Comes no surprise, the gravy train to Ukraine is still rolling, especially with Canada, because they just announced Ministers McGuinty and announced more than $200 million more in funding for Ukraine. More. How much money are we up to at this point? They can't even hold a budget to know how much money we're funneling into Ukraine. They don't even have proper budget, but we're just going to get $200 million more. We're just going to go to the money tree, right? That's how we generate revenue, right? Just flows on trees. It's not like we're stealing tax dollars and depriving more Canadians. That's exactly what they're doing, folks. $200 million more funding in Ukraine. Man, can you imagine if $200 million went towards hospitals? Maybe people wouldn't have to subjugate themselves to MAID if they actually had proper functioning healthcare. You know, that thing that Tommy Douglas fought for in the 60s that was part of our country's heritage? Imagine if they put $200 million in infrastructure. Imagine if they put $200 million in schools, educating young people. Imagine if they put $200 million in food banks, considering there's 2 million people a month lining up at food banks. But no, $200 million more for endless warfare in Ukraine. Because the goal is continuous warfare. That's what that's what Julian Assange always reminded us, that it's continuous warfare. They don't want this to ever end. So, just announced the government is pledging another $235 million in funding for Ukraine, with National Defense Minister David McGuinty and Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand announcing Canada's latest commitments. McGuinty says Canada will work with NATO allies to purchase a package of crucial military capabilities sourced from the United States, valued at around $500 million United States currency. Canada's contribution to the prioritized Ukraine requirements list package will be $200 million Canadian. At a meeting of NATO ministries of Foreign Affairs in Brussels, Anand announced $35 million in funding for NATO's comprehensive assistance package for Ukraine. A Global Affairs Canada news release says the funding will allow NATO to provide Ukraine with medical supplies, personnel, protective equipment, communication tools, training, logistics support, and support measures to enhance Ukraine's interoperability with NATO forces and rebuild critical defense infrastructure. Yet, we don't have enough money to protect our border. Yet, we don't have enough money to protect our streets here in Canada. Yet, we're allowing our own citizens to starve and die. But let's make sure their defense is up to date. Let's make sure we send our money over to this corrupted nation full of neo-Nazis to keep the war going. The Global Affairs Canada news release says Canada has committed nearly $22 billion in funding for Ukraine since 2022, including $6.5 billion in funding for military assistance to Ukraine through 2029. So this is going to keep going till 2029. These new proposals are. Again, think of how much money they could take from that to invest into our country. And that would be an investment with a actual promising outcome. Imagine they took that money and assisted the veterans that sacrificed their lives through Afghanistan and all the wars that Canada's contributed to. Imagine if they took that for veterans assistance. Instead of telling them, hey, I know you sacrificed your life, but you're useless now, so go line up for MAID. Wow. $22 billion. I know that doesn't sound a lot compared to what the United States has given. I think it's upward to like $200 billion. But think about the Canadian perspective, our economy, our governance. That's a lot of money. $22 billion that could easily go to facilitate a prosperous outcome for this country, and they're bleeding us dry. So this new rules geopolitics, I found this pretty interesting. It says Ukrainian corruption black hole vanished $108 billion. So right now, as they're pledging more money to Ukraine, there's a corruption scandal. There's a massive corruption investigation involving Zelensky and people within his administration. As Canada is announcing more and more tax dollars being funneled to Ukraine with no hesitation. The Zelensky regime has been shaken by a series of high-profile corruption scandals, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. Don't believe us? Here's the evidence. Professor Stephen Hake estimates $54 billion to $108 billion lost from the $360 billion total aid since 2022. That's 15 to 30% lost to graft. So the money that they sent to Ukraine, that they said they didn't want accountability, that they weren't going to follow up on it, they weren't going to send accountants over there. They're just, Ukraine's going to figure it out. They lost 15 to 30% of the money. And they're still not holding them accountable. World Bank EU indirect estimate. Pre-war studies estimate Ukraine lost 5 to 10% of GDP annually to corruption. Applied to the current $145 billion plus in direct budget support, this suggests $7 billion to $15 billion plus in baseline systemic leakage of financial aid alone. And that's from the World Bank Governance Indicators EU anti-corruption reports. I love how they have these anti-corruption groups. When can Canada get one of those? Because I would love to see an anti-corruption brigade take on our politicians. I would love to see that. That would be like Christmas right now. To see, the raid of Stephen Guilbeault and Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney. When do we get an anti-corruption brigade going after our politicians? That's what I want to know. So procurement loss benchmark. Ukraine's own state audit service identified 18% of audit procurement spending as violations in 2023. Applied to Ukraine's $40 billion annual procurement budget, this indicates a $7 billion plus annual corruption risk pool. State procurement in 2023, $1.7 billion in unjustified expenditures, a formal term for corrupted leakage. So is that, did they mean the penthouses that they bought in Italy and in New Jersey? Remember the stories that came out that certain insiders of Ukraine's government were buying real estate in other countries? Is that what they mean by that? Unjustified expenditures. That could be a slew of things. We don't really know for sure. Transparency International data. Ukraine's CPI score of 33 to 100 places it in the bottom third globally, correlating historically with public sector leakage rates of 20 to 40% in high-risk expenditure categories. The Zelensky administration has created a perverse ecosystem where consistence range, independent macro models converge on 10 to 20% as the plausible systemic leakage rate for non-military financial flows. Of the $145 billion in direct budget support and humanitarian aid, a conservative 10% leakage equals 14.5% loss, not to the war, but to graft. So the money that we're giving to Ukraine, they're losing not because of the war. They're losing it because their politicians are corrupt and taking the money and running. And of course they would do that. Because this administration, Zelensky, the only reason he's president of Ukraine is because NATO allies, the European Unions, and the military-industrial complex installed him to become president. They took a guy who was a TV actor to become president. He's a fake. He's a stooge. He's a prop. And they're using Ukraine as a pawn to do a full advanced warfare against Russia. Something that they've wanted to do since the Cold War. The military aid, unknown. No reliable estimate exists for weapons diversion, but the procurement fraud model suggests parallel losses in defense spending are inevitable and substantial. The proven multi-billion-dollar fraud is merely the measurable tip of the iceberg. These numbers were taken from Western organizations and agencies, so the corruption cases could be more and even deeper. Because, these agencies are working in alliance with corruption in Ukraine. They knew how corrupted Ukraine was from the start. There was articles before this war telling us that Ukraine was massively corrupted. It was one of the most corrupted nations in Eastern Europe. And yet somehow we're still giving them money. We're still giving them money. We're still supporting them. We're blindly supporting them because, they're fighting against Russia. They're almost there. We just got to give them more money. That sounds like a Nigerian prince scandal. The prince of Nigeria is emailing you. He needs support. When's Zelensky going to go back onto NBC and do a telethon again? Well, if you don't have the money, then give us credit. Give us credit. Use your American Express. You can get the points off it. Give us more money. So here is, I think this is Professor John Mearsheimer. I can't really tell from the, I'm pretty sure that's him. Looks of it. Well, here's what he's saying about the corruption scandals.
If we look at the total amount of money that's been pumped into Ukraine since 2022, it's about $360 billion. And out of that, I estimate that the corruption's running somewhere between 15 and 30% of that. Probably towards the 30% line. That's what the auditors found with the involvement of the United States in Afghanistan. The corruption was running at 30% in Afghanistan. I think it's probably pretty close to that in Ukraine. So we're talking, Mike, about big bucks. We've got at 15%. The corruption money lining the pockets of the corrupt, $54 billion. And at 30%, it would be $108 billion. So basically, you got to pay to play.
It's pay to play. So Canada sending all this money, all the politicians sending the money, pledging support to Ukraine, are paying to play war games. They're paying for Ukraine to get slaughtered, more so because they want to have warfare with Russia. And they know how corrupted this is. They know that the Ukrainian government is massively corrupted. It's easily obvious to people that could see through the smoke, could see through the blinders, and are blindsided by the crap that they hear on television, that they hear on mainstream media, prepping up this war as some sort of, massive defense that, oh my God, if Ukraine falls, then Russia's going to take over the world. They know how corrupted all this is. They know this is a lie. They know this is a lie from the get-go. But they have to fearmonger. They have to propagandize you. They had to do that censorious takedown of people that are spewing Russian propaganda, the Russian tropes that are being spewed out by individuals, podcasters, journalists, tennis players. They had to demonize them because it kept the war afloat. And ultimately, that's why the troops were able to leave Afghanistan not well, because they knew another war was going to go on foot. They're never, ever, ever going to stop warfare. Because, as Julian Assange reminds us, Julian Assange, who was kept in captivity and tortured because he revealed the obvious to us. The point of this is to keep wars going. They don't want resolution. They don't want this to end. They want continuous warfare so that the bankers and the billionaires that paid to play, using his words, profit off it. This is an investment to them. But for us, it's survival. It's deadly. It's dangerous. It's destructive. And while you're siphoning more dollars out of us to pay for this, you're not only killing the people in Ukraine to keep the warfare going, but you're also killing Canadians. Be advised of that. Be advised of that. So it's even gone to certain outlets. This is from Sky News of the UK, where even they're starting to report the corruption. They're now realizing that Zelensky is screwed. And this woman here, Michelle, hashtag America First, says the Zelensky era of corruption is over. Anti-corruption agencies have raided his offices. You know, the more I hear it, the more I really want anti-corruption agencies here. Because do you know how much dirt they be getting from Canadian politicians? Holy crap. It would be like Christmas. It would be like Christmas for us. We've screened from the rooftops for years that billions of our taxpayer dollars would end up in the pockets of Zelensky and his cronies. Yet another conspiracy theory came true. And what have I said from day one of this war? That it was manufactured, it was a false flag, they're using Ukraine as pawns, and the only reason they're keeping this going is because someone's making a quick buck off it. And it turns out it's Zelensky, it's the cronies, it's NATO, it's the military contractors, and you are the ones that are suffering. You're the ones being sacrificed into this meat grinder of the war machine. And the reason they keep these wars going, because they don't care about who wins. They just care about profitability. And now it's become so obvious that even Sky News has to report on it.
A line of breaking news to bring you, coming to us from out of Ukraine. Now, you will know that there has been a corruption scandal engulfing that man's administration, President Volodymyr Zelensky. In the last few minutes, officials have reported that the anti-corruption authorities, that is NABU, have carried out searches of President Zelensky's offices. That's according to officials there.
Well, yes, and as we're saying, Ukraine has been caught up in this damaging corruption scandal, and anti-corruption agencies have been talking about how they believe that some of President Zelensky's close associates could be involved in some kind of plot. The thought is that perhaps money has been skimmed off Ukraine's energy sector. And this scandal erupting, of course, while Ukrainians are suffering blackouts caused by Russian bombing. So that investigation is underway.
So, I love how they tried to reveal it. They try to give themselves, the legality to say, look, we did inform you about the corruption, but this is all developing information. This is all brand new. As if, a couple years ago, someone like me, a smart-ass Canadian in his basement on a shoestring budget podcast, revealed this to you beforehand. And I was called a kook. I was called a conspiracy nut. I lost friends over this, believe it or not. Because, oh my God, how dare you be so racist against the Ukrainians and support Russians? I knew you were a traitor. That's literally a quote someone told me. And I don't know why I'm considered a traitor for saying that, hey, money should remain in Canada for Canadians. My God, the idea of supporting our own people in this country is so radical to people. No, we got to take our hard-earned money and send it overseas where we don't know where it's going. That's the smart thing to do. That's the adult thing to do. But I love how they try to, they still have to spin this. They still have to spin it. No, it's the energy sector. It's still developing information. We have no idea what's this about. So maybe they could be caught in a corruption scandal, but we don't really know for sure. It's not like some smartass of the Shoestring Budget Podcast was able to reveal this information, or other people were able to reveal this information. It's not like we can go back in time and actually look at the conspiracy theorists and maybe realize that they were actually right about this. Because they can't reveal the truth. They cannot reveal the truth, because once the truth gets revealed, that's when the war starts fading out. That's when people get pissed off and angered, and they demand the end of this. The truth is the worst weapon when it comes to warfare. The truth. When people realize how this war actually started, not on February 2022 when Russia came in, when they realized that why Zelensky became the president, a buffoon comedian, TV personality, became president of Ukraine, when they realized that we're training with neo-Nazis, that's when people get riled up, angered, pissed off, and they demand an end to this. Just like people have been demanding an end to this for quite some time, but of course they're getting snubbed. They're getting said that they're Russian assets. Oh, they're being propagandized. You know, all the shorthand videos on TikTok. Wow. See the rest of this.
This latest development is that officials are now saying that those anti-corruption authorities are conducting searches of President Zelensky's chief of staff.
Yeah, it centres around that energy company, Energy-Atom, and the main focus of this is one of President Zelensky's key allies.
I think that's Ursula von der Leyen, Lucifer, whatever her name is. You know, that says, you know, we gotta starve out our nations because that's the good thing. You know, you're gonna have to freeze your ass in the winter, but think about what Ukraine's doing. Think about those guys while you freeze your ass off and possibly die. We had to blow up the pipeline because you guys are selfish. Ukraine is fighting for their lives. She's a puppet of the oligarchy. She's a puppet of the globalist agenda. And I'm sure she's talking to Zelensky saying, okay, hang in there, smile and nod, and we won't try and take you out. We won't do anything like that. We're not abusing you. You're not like a puppet or anything. You know, that's exactly the case. So I don't know what's going to happen. Either they're going to try and force Zelensky to drop out, or, you know, how many times we've seen, you know, taking out a leader. Just saying. Because once the word gets out, it's hard to contain it. Especially if it goes on social media. That's why they're trying so hard to crack down on social media. Because once it gets posted on the internet, it doesn't go away. Does not go away. And the truth will be revealed. Even ABC News even covered it. Zelensky chief of staff resigns after anti-corruption raids. Yermak had been leading negotiations with the United States to end the war with Russia. So, I feel like they're trying to spin this. I feel like they're trying to, they're doing the anti-corruption raids, but yet they're going to try and spin this to say that, well, since the guy that was leading the negotiations for peace is obtained by the anti-corruption raids, I guess we can't have peace now because we don't have a negotiator. The negotiator is caught up in the scandal right now, so I guess we got to keep the war going. That's what it feels like to me when you write something like that. And I'm sure ABC News is going to spin this as well to say, oh, we had no idea what was happening here. It's not like we had articles beforehand telling us that Ukraine was a corrupt nation full of neo-Nazis and should be alarmed by this. Not like we had information about this beforehand. We just had no idea. Absurd. And you remember Justin Trudeau, our former prime minister, Pee-wee Herman. Remember he screamed so loudly for Ukraine? Remember all this? Remember the rallies he did? Remember he screamed and demonized Canadians that spoke out against this. How dare you? How dare you? I just remember this rally. This wasn't a rally for, hey, we got to support Canadians, or hey, the veterans are needing assistance, or hey, let's, rebuild healthcare for the safety and sanctity of our nation. That's one of the things that makes Canada, Canada, Tommy Douglas. It wasn't a rally like that. This is a rally screaming about Vladimir Putin and saying Ukraine must win this war, meaning that you, the average Canadian, has to give up more to this corrupt nation because I'm manipulating, brainwashing you to think that this war is going to be won. We all know it was not about winning the war. It was about keeping the war going because there was profits to be made. And here's Trudeau being that face.
Canadians know this is a question of right or wrong. Canadians know that, yes, it is incredibly hard for Ukraine to continue to stand against a Russian aggression. And
what about the hardship of Canadians that can't afford basic groceries? What about the hardship that Canadian jobs are being displaced? What about the it baffles me. It baffles me. And anyone that talks about it, you're deemed a selfish idiot. You're a Nazi. You're a racist. You're a white supremacist. How dare you talk about domestic issues? Think of what Ukraine is dealing with. Yeah, think about what Ukraine's doing with our money. Think about all the corruption that's happening right now that's finally being exposed on mainstream media that I pointed out years ago, and the money that we sent over there is now gone. Think about that. Think about that.
Let's be honest. It's hard for the democracies around the world who are there to support their citizens, who are investing for the future, who are challenged with a challenging economy around the world, to continue to step up as Canada has with close to $9 billion in aid for Ukraine.
Like the democracies that freeze bank accounts of peaceful protesters. The democracies that lock up two predominant people that were fighting for the people. The democracies that tell you, go shut up, get into line, and follow the rule. The democracies that get the RCMP to beat up their own citizens. That democracy. We got to defend the good institutions of tyrannicalness and globalization and screwing over the working class. Yes! Oligarchy for the win. Oh, man.
But we will, because the cost on Canadians, on our lives, on our world, will be so much greater if Putin wins this war that we will and have to stand every single day until Ukraine wins this war.
Look at that face. Look at that. You tell me that's a person who actually thought this through. I'm pretty sure. I can't guarantee this, but I'm sure just looking at that face, looking at like the anger, I'm sure someone told him that he had to do this. I'm sure that there was some NATO insider spoke right to Justin Trudeau, right to his ear, saying, if you do not scream for Ukraine, I would hate for something to happen to Canada. Why NATO is a dangerous organization. And I'm not the one who said that. There's many other people, many experts who all agree that NATO is a dangerous organization to be allied with. That's why I've been saying maybe it's time to reconsider our partnership with NATO, because if this is the greatness that comes out of it, they get a prime minister screaming at Canadians, you got to give up more. You got to shut up. You got to stand into line and support this greedy, corrupt nation instead of supporting Canadians. I don't think they work for us. I don't think it's a great ally. I don't think it's a great relationship that they're screwing over their ally nations to fund a war that was never going to end, that's causing the mass slaughter of millions of innocent people. And all for what? So that they can take the precious minerals from Ukraine so they can take over the wheat field so that BlackRock can go in and rebuild those towns to smart cities so they can live in 15-minute tech jails. What's the benefit from this? What's the benefit from this to keep this war going? Many people don't understand it. I don't understand it. Many people are disgusted by it, respectively. And yet our politicians just continue funding the money. And I just find it hysterical that, Ukraine has anti-corruption agencies that are investigating their own. And I'd just be amazed if they can do something like that in Canada. Imagine if they had anti-corruption agencies for this country so that we can fully expose criminals like this, criminals like Chrystia Freeland, Mark Carney, Stephen Guilbeault, Doug Ford. Imagine how much corruption we can be exposing to the public so that the public's more aware that we actually have a more stance, a staunch in actual democracy. Instead of this phony garbage being spewed by despicable people.